Hi there, Tim and Chris here from Reventon, here with Terry Ryder. We're just about to hop into the Reventon Roundtable, the first discussion of the property market for 2020. Terry, thanks so much for coming down. We always love this day. We look forward to it.
Me too. Always like to be here, and it's always great to talk about real estate. As you've often noticed, the hard part is getting me to shut up.
Well, we enjoy everything you've got to say, and hopefully it's a really good episode. Click the link below. Look forward to speaking to you soon.
Hi Terry, and thanks for joining us in our first Reventon Roundtable of 2020.
Always a pleasure.
So, buyer sentiment, how do you find it at the moment?
It's like chalk and cheese compared to the discussion we had 12 months ago. Everything's changed for the better for property markets. And one of the significant things that we're seeing now is that whereas the previous boom, the big uplift we saw in Sydney and Melbourne was very localised to the big cities, now we're seeing uplift right across the board. You know, the figures for prices for January and for the most recent quarter showed uplift in all the capital cities and most of the regional markets as well. So that's the first time we've actually seen a national situation since the early part of the century.
And you talk a lot about not just the overall rate, but the sub-regions as well. So it's not always a true indication of just seeing the overall rate being 4%, because sub-regions can obviously be much higher. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, and within sub-regions there are individual markets. I think the problem we have with media coverage of real estate is it's very misleading because they generalise and they sensationalise. And what you and I know to be true is that it's all about local markets and local economy. So there are specific markets that are doing exceptionally well in Australia. That's true at any point in time, but especially right now, many of them are in the regions. Many of our really good regional centres are actually been outperforming capital cities in the last, say, 12 to 18 months.
And how would you go about identifying those good regions?
Well, it's all about tracking what's happening with their economies. We look for infrastructure spending as a big indicator. We look at vacancy rate, which is a very good forward indicator. If vacancies are very low, something's happening in that market. And when vacancies are low, rentals will rise and prices tend to follow. It's a great forward indicator. So we look for that. We look for population data. If population is rising strongly, then something's going on in the economy. And out of that, residential real estate always follows on.
Data is very, very important. And obviously with hotspotting, it's something that's important to you. You've been in real estate for 40 years, and we're talking about this 20 years to 60 years collectively, and the whole team was probably 100 years of experience here on this table.
Yeah.
So you're talking about population growth. I said Melbourne in the last 12 months grew 2.5%, so it was the leader for the nation in at least in capital city growth. So we tipped over the 5 million mark. What does that do to our roads? What does that do to all of our resources here in Victoria? Because we're obviously having trouble with public transport and all sorts of things at the moment. And then obviously, what does it have? How does that affect housing?
Yeah, well, it creates a big need for infrastructure spending, and that's what the state government and others are grappling with at the moment. There's a number of really big projects on the books that are in planning and coming up against the usual hurdles and problems and political issues, but that's what the population creates, a need for infrastructure spending, and that creates economy and it creates jobs, and so residential real estate benefits from that. But it's not just Melbourne. Regional Victoria also is very much part of it. Victoria is the number one state as an economy. It's the number one state for population growth, and it's not just Melbourne. So the regional areas are also getting really big uplift. The lowest unemployment rate anywhere in Australia is actually regional Victoria right now, and there's a lot going on in those cities, and I know you're very aware of the Ballarats and the Bendigos of this world, but it's actually quite extensive right across the state. So this very much is the dynamic state of Australia in terms of economy and real estate.
It's funny thinking of that population growth for Melbourne specifically. There was that 2.5% actually is 120,000 people, and I picture in my head, the MCG full-on grand final day, and every one of those people go and find a brand new home. So it's got to be adding to the roof lines. It has to have a big effect on housing.
And it's important to know where it's coming from, because a lot of it's coming from overseas, and that has demographic implications, because we're seeing lots of demographic trends pointing more and more towards attached dwellings, to apartments and townhouses, rather than houses. I mean, the dominant paradigm is that houses on land is the best growth, but that paradigm is perhaps changing because
we've been talking about that a lot lately.
We've got young buyers actually prefer the apartment lifestyle. We've got elderly Australians wanting to downsize. And then we've got people coming from overseas as migrants fueling the population growth, particularly in Melbourne, coming from places where that type of living is the norm. So there's quite a big shift in terms of the buyer preferences coming through, and I'm sure you're seeing that in your business.
And rent investing has become very prevalent now in this day and age as well. People are living where they're close to work, but they're investing where they can afford to. So that's becoming a lot more prevalent now. We're seeing in the market as well. Yeah,
rent investing has become huge, and it makes absolute perfect sense for the young Australian that they want to stay connected, can't necessarily afford to buy where they want to live, so they rent. And then they invest maybe in a good regional centre where it's affordable.
With that, obviously there is a lot of people that are wanting to live in a city. The last couple of years, because there hasn't been foreign finance, there hasn't been finance for foreign purchases. A lot of developers that were sitting on their land just haven't released their projects. So I think I saw a stat at the end of last year that there was 30,000 new units that hit new houses or units that hit the market in Melbourne in 2016, and then 2019 it was only 9,000.
Yeah.
So surely that's got to have a bit of effect on that washout of apartment supply. Over the next couple of years, you'd start to see a bit more growth in the apartment market too.
Sounds like a typical cycle, doesn't it? There's a lot of building, and then they get to the point where maybe they built too much, so it peters off for a while. But we're now starting to see the building approval figures start to rise again, because they're starting to realise that a lot of that excess stock has been soaked up, and there's going to get to a situation of shortage. And more now in media we're seeing stories instigated by research companies suggesting that Australia generally is heading towards a shortage of dwellings, and that it's time for the development industry to crank up again.
It doesn't sound like it was all that long ago we're sitting here talking about oversupply in a lot of these markets.
Yeah, well,
it's too long to change.
It does move quickly, doesn't it? But it's all about cycles, and it's very hard for the development industry to get it right, because they're talking about projects with lead times of several years, and it's really hard to get the timing right. So we sometimes end up with oversupply in some markets.
So many moving parts, but it's always important, I think, too, for a company to sell not just house and land, because the cycle does change, townhouses and apartments, to be diverse in your product offering, because, as you said, the products do change a lot.
Yeah, and because demographics change and population mixes change, and that starts to dictate different types of product. And it's probably true that there's certain market sectors out there that aren't really being catered for. What do those downsizers, for example, what do they really want? They maybe want to downsize to an apartment, yes, but what sort of an apartment? And then the indications are that they actually want quite a large apartment. They don't want to move into something tiny, because they're coming from maybe a 4 or 5 bedroom, 2 bathroom family home. So they're probably looking for a larger apartment, and is that market being catered for currently?
You're seeing the developers, they're building larger apartments now for that reason as well. And Mars, obviously the head of finance at Reventine, how do you see the change in finance in the last 12 months with all the APRA things changing and laws?
Well, there's definitely been a tightening overall in relation to policy. I think we're now starting to come out the other end. Banks have required more documents over the last 24 months, and that's due to the Royal Commission mainly, and a bit of a slap across the back of the wrist. Hopefully with the introduction of open banking, we should hopefully start to see banks coming up with better policies rather than just cashback offers to bring clients on board, which should hopefully allow different types of people to be able to borrow.
From investors, December they were saying that there was more investor loans in December than there was the highest one for like 14 months or something. So it's obviously bouncing back for investors.
Yeah, definitely. We're finding that we're getting a lot of investor deals come through. A lot more people are now starting to purchase and open back up to the idea of investing again.
And money's so cheap now, it's a good time to actually get your money working for and really start investing. That's actually a good thing for investors.
Definitely. We're seeing rates at the moment reflective of what owner-occupier rates were 24 months ago. So the doors are wide open, and people are definitely ready to jump out there and get their feet wet again.
Of course.
Yeah, there's some fantastic deals out there at the moment, aren't there? I mean, the interest rates on offer are incredible.
Hey, if you do it through Reventine, we'll give you a free holiday too.
Really? Okay.
Heading back to the actual markets, I suppose, for Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, the three major cities.
Yeah.
I saw, obviously, in the December quarter and then the start of this quarter sort of rebounded again from where we were 6 months ago. I heard, I think it was John Lindemann said the other day that he's referring to it like a dead cat bounce, which is quite a vivid way to look at it. But obviously, we've bounced back up to maybe where we were 12 months ago, but there's a bit of speculation, maybe we're still going to see another boom, and then what John's saying is he's expecting that we've regained that, but we might see a bit of a lull. How do you see that happening?
It sounds like a very generalised comment, and I keep coming back to the point, it's all about individual markets. I mean, previously it was about Sydney and Melbourne, and they dropped, and they still haven't come back up to the same levels as before. But they're heading in that direction. But what's different this time is it's the smaller capital cities are also rising, and the regional areas, generally speaking, are rising too. So at last we're seeing some indication of uplift in Brisbane. People have been predicting it for quite a while, and it hasn't done it because it hasn't had the drivers that Sydney and Melbourne have had, like infrastructure spending, but that's starting to change. Adelaide's starting to uplift as well, and there's quite important things happening in that market. Perth is showing more and more signs of recovering. Canberra's looking pretty solid. The only capital city likely to be left behind is probably Darwin at this stage. Okay. And then you've got regional areas for various reasons looking really promising too. So, but you've got to look at it at a location by location basis. It's not one situation. Yeah. And there's different dynamics in different markets, and that's why investors need people like you and like our business for the information that really tells them what's going on, because media's not going to do it for them. They're just going to sensationalise and generalise, and there's nothing useful for anybody to know out of that.
Research and data is paramount though, and when we were talking about cycles, I always say to people, you say location, location, location. I say affordability, affordability, affordability. As long as you can afford to keep it, you can weather any market cycle and make money. And it shows the difference between a property investor or a property speculator. So we put a lot of emphasis on having the right safety nets in place and a good buffer to make sure they can weather a storm. Because the market's not always going to go up 100%, is it?
No, that's right. And when it comes to affordability, that's again, we start to talk about the smaller capital cities and the regional areas, because there's wonderful affordability on offer in some of those places. And we've seen a lot of Melbourne buyers looking at and actively buying, both as investors and home buyers in places like Ballarat. It's commutable and so much more affordable.
Terry, I know you're a big fan of Geelong, and I'm not sure if you've seen that 3-minute video that's come out by the Welsh Group. They're going to spend $1 billion in the Armstrong Creek Town Centre. Yeah. What kind of an impact do you think that will have on top of the big growth that those areas in Armstrong Creek and Mount Denise have already had?
It just adds to what's already there. I mean, Geelong's a very dynamic economy. The media told us that it was the end of Geelong when they closed down the car plant. What they overlooked was the jobs being lost were outnumbered by the jobs being created in other areas by about 12 to 1. And Geelong's an amazing regional economy in its own right. And what's happening at Armstrong Creek is just a continuation of that. It's got land for new communities. It's got a great lifestyle offering. Peninsula surrounded almost surrounded by water and all of that, and well connected to the capital city as well. So, and much more affordable than downtown Melbourne. So,
and some parts of Geelong, I think, have got better, more expensive land prices than parts of the west of Melbourne.
Yeah.
Areas like Wyndham Vale and so forth. So it just gives you a good idea of how strong that market is.
And it all hooks into other important markets like the Surf Coast, places like Torquay and Jan Juc. We've been looking at those markets recently for clients, and the unemployment rate in Torquay is one of the lowest in the country. There's almost no unemployment there. It's just a wonderful lifestyle place, and it hooks into the economy of Geelong in terms of services and jobs.
You think you'd be going down there to not work though, wouldn't you?
Well, a certain part of there's a high content of retirees, but there's also families as well.
Now, the one big one, sorry, Joe, the one big one I've been meaning to ask you is at Brisbane. We've been talking about the handbrake being on there. There's been so much going on the last couple of years, but we haven't seen that price growth. Are we getting any closer?
I think we are, and I know people have been predicting it for a number of years. I think people just assumed that because Sydney and Melbourne had boomed, Brisbane also would, but Brisbane didn't have the drivers. But what what it lacked, it's now starting to get. The infrastructure spending is starting to happen. Projects are, there's some really big ones. The cross city rail, the expansion of the airport, the big Queen's Wharf, the casino. There's a lot now starting to happen with road infrastructure. They're planning to build an alternative route linking Brisbane to the Gold Coast. That's needed. So there's a lot, and it's actually starting to happen now. So that starts to generate activity and jobs. The population data increasingly favours southeast Queensland, and most of the interstate migration to Queensland goes to Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and some to the Sunshine Coast.
I've said it's a sleeping giant for many years, but now because of all those factors, we think it's about to wake up.
And it's the affordability comparison as well. And whenever they survey investors around Australia, where are you thinking of going next? Well, Brisbane's now topping the poll, and so this year. And the state economy is starting to improve as well. It's to a certain degree reliant on the resources sector, which is revitalising. So that's helping as well.
Okay. Terry, we'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks. We'll get you down here on, I think it's the 3rd of March. We'll put a link in the bottom of the video, but we look forward to seeing you for our topic, the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah.
The greatest opportunity for capital growth in the country at the moment. So we're looking forward to learning more about that. We've got Anthony Hancock from Mosaic joining us as well. Yeah. So we'll have the three of you on there talking about all things Sunshine Coast.
Sunshine Coast is a great topic. It's a very dynamic economy. I think people will be amazed when they hear what's going on there, and also some of the results that Mosaic specifically has been getting with their projects on the waterfront. Amazing prices for the Sunshine Coast. Yeah.
Well, Terry, on behalf of myself and the team, thank you very much. As always, I look forward to the next battle, which is on the 3rd of March.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys.